Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's midnight now here in Cairo, and this is a new edition of Panorama News. In this edition, we're going to be tackling all the main political news, also the economic and financial updates. But first off, we'll start off with the political news, and the headlines lead the way. Vote counting begins in the first phase of Egypt's parliamentary elections. Foreign Minister Shukri says Egypt will seek to fight terror through its membership in the UN Security Council. And Yemen's government accepts talks with Shiite rebels. Welcome back. The news in details. I'm Henny Saif. Egyptian polling stations closed on Monday night on the second and final day of the first phase of the parliamentary elections. Spokesman for the Higher Elections Committee, Omar Marwan, said in a press conference that vote counting begins immediately after closing ballot boxes. Marwan added that no turnout figure has been issued by the HEC and that all the figures that have been announced by media are wrong. The vote marks the final step in the roadmap transition to democracy. Monday is the second day of voting in 14 provinces, including Cairo's twin city of Giza and the Mediterranean port city of Alexandria. Voting in Egypt's other 13 provinces, including the capital Cairo, will take place next month. Final results are scheduled to be announced in December, and the 596-seat chamber is expected to hold its inaugural session later in the month. Prime Minister Sharif Ismail was following up on parliamentary elections in the second day of voting from the operations room of the Cabinet Information Center. Ismail held video conference calls with governors of the 14 governorates in which the vote in the first phase of the election is held. The Premier followed up on measures to secure the vote and means of facilitating the process. Early reports from the operation room, headed by Minister of Local Development Ahmed Zaki Badr, showed that a number of polling stations in Bahira and Bani Suef opened late. Campaigning activities were also reported in Al-Bahira and Luxor governorates in violation of the electoral silence. Vote counting of Egyptian expats in the first phase of parliamentary elections was concluded in all consulates and embassies. Assistant Foreign Minister for Election Affairs, Hamdi Louza, said that the results of the vote held overseas during the last 2 days will be announced later. Egyptian expats voted on Saturday and Sunday in the first phase of the parliamentary elections. Embassies and consulates in 139 countries were opened for the vote. The Higher Election Committee had earlier said that voting would not take place in Yemen, Syria, Libya and the South African Republic due to the security situation in those countries. The Ministry of Health announced that 69 people were injured in the second day of parliamentary elections voting in 14 governorates. The injured suffered of high blood pressure, high temperature and fainting. 3 of the injured were as a result of a quarrel in Abshwaya in Fayoum governorate. Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shukri said on Monday that Egypt will seek through its membership in the UN Security Council to mobilize world countries to fight terrorism. Shukri was delivering Egypt's speech in the ministerial meeting of Multicultural and Peaceful Coexistence Conference held in Athens. Shukri stressed that Muslims are the first ones who fell victims for terrorism. Shukri stressed on the historical relations between Egypt and Greece, confirming Egypt's keenness on cooperation in economic, cultural and social fields. Government forces advanced on Monday under the cover of Russian airstrikes towards an air base besieged by the Daesh group in northern Syria. The offensive in the northern province of Aleppo aims to lift the siege that Daesh has been imposing on the Quiras military base since 2014.
Rebels battling the Syrian army and its allies near said on Monday they had received new supplies of U.S.-made anti-tank missiles from state opposed to President Bashar al-Assad since the start of a major government offensive last week. The rebels from 3 groups said new supplies had arrived in response to the attack by the army, which is backed up by Russian airstrikes and on the ground by Iranian fighters and Lebanon's Hezbollah. The delivery of the U.S.-made TWO missiles to rebels in Aleppo elsewhere in Syria appears to be an initial response to the new Russian-Iranian intervention. Foreign states supporting the rebels include Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Qatar. But officials from one of the Aleppo-based rebel groups said the supplies were inadequate for the scale of the assault, one of several ground offensives underway with Russian air support. A number of rebel groups vetted by states opposed to Assad have been supplied with weapons, part of a program supported by the United States and which has in some cases included military training by the Central Intelligence Agency.
The Saudi foreign minister said on Monday Syrian President Bashar al-Assad can hold on to power in war-torn Syria only until a transitional council of opposition and government figures has been set up. Haider al-Jubeir held a joint press conference with his German counterpart Frank-Walter Steinmeier. The German minister was on a day-long stop in Saudi Arabia after visiting Iran, seeking ways to end the war in Syria. Germany has taken in 600,000 refugees from Syria and elsewhere since January, as Europe grapples with its worst refugee crisis since World War II. The Governing Council was proposed under a United Nations-sponsored Geneva I initiative in 2012. The Council would run state institutions and pave the way for elections. Steinmeier, for his part, said that on the long term, there can be no solution there with Assad. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said on Monday Israeli and Palestinian leaders need to clarify the status of Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound to help end a spate of bloodshed and restore stability. Kerry, preparing for meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Germany and then with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Jordan's King Abdullah, likely in Amman, also rejected a proposal by France at the United Nations for an international presence at the holy site. Israel called on France's ambassador on Monday to make clear its opposition to the idea. The Palestinians' unrest, the most serious in years, has been steered in part by anger over increased Jewish encroachment on the mosque compound, Islam's most sacred site outside Saudi Arabia, and also revered by Jews as the allegedly location of 2 destroyed biblical Jewish temples. Talks to end months of fighting in Yemen will convene in Geneva at the end of October under the sponsorship of the United Nations, according to the UN Special Envoy for the issue.
Yemen has accepted an invitation from the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for talks with Shiite Houthi rebels at the end of this month to discuss the implementation of a UN resolution aimed at ending months of heavy fighting. Government spokesman said officials will meet in Geneva to discuss the unconditional implementation of a Security Council resolution that requires the rebels to withdraw from all areas they control and lay down arms captured in months of fighting. The Security Council approved the resolution in April, about months after a Saudi-led coalition began launching airstrikes against the rebels in support of the internationally recognized government. The UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Ismail Weld Sheikh Ahmed, concluded the 3-day visit to the region on Monday, where he met Yemeni President Abdurrabbu Mansour, who is in exile in Saudi Arabia, and other Yemeni officials.
A bomb killed at least 11 people on Monday on a crowded bus in Pakistan's western city of Quetta, capital of a province racked by years of separatist violence. The bomb exploded as the bus was bound for the city's suburbs, carrying dozens of passengers home from work. Balochistan province has seen almost a decade of separatist violence against government personnel and security forces, as well as non-Baloch ethnic groups. Security forces have in turn carried out a security crackdown that Baloch activists say has resulted in thousands of disappearances and hundreds of extrajudicial killings. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. The U.S. military said that an armored vehicle carrying U.S. personnel deliberately crashed through the medical compound in northern Afghanistan, where 22 people were killed in a U.S. air attack 2 weeks ago. Navy Captain Jeff Davis, a Pentagon spokesman, said that it was a mistake. He said that the Afghan vehicle carrying U.S. personnel drove through the closed gate last Thursday to gain access to the compound run by an international charity called Doctors Without Borders. Davis said they believed incorrectly that none of the charity's personnel were present. He said the visit was to assess the structural integrity of the building damaged in the October 3rd attack. NATO launched its biggest military exercise in 13 years at an army base in southern Italy. During the opening ceremony, NATO soldiers performed exercises showcasing some of the alliance's fighter jets and helicopters.
NATO is launching its biggest military exercise in 13 years, mobilizing 36,000 soldiers, sailors and airmen from more than 30 countries to test the alliance's ability to respond to new security threats. NATO Deputy General Alexander Vershbow said that the Trident Juncture exercise will demonstrate that NATO can deal with everything from conventional military engagements to more subtle hybrid warfare techniques and propaganda. Vershbow added that the geopolitical situation is considerably more unstable than the last time such large-scale exercises were held during the Cold War. The Sicilian city, Trapani, will be the operational center for the exercise that begins on Wednesday and runs through early November, extending into Spain, Portugal, and adjacent waters.
Germany, Turkey and Italy are set to keep their deployments in Afghanistan at current levels after the U.S. government decided to prolong its 14-year-old military presence there. The Taliban's brief takeover of a provincial capital has raised concern about the strength of Afghan state forces, and both the United States and its NATO allies now say events rather than timetables must dictate gradual troop reductions. General Philip Breedlove, NATO's top commander in Europe, said he had assurances that NATO will continue alongside the nearly 10,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi said last week that Italy is considering keeping its soldiers in Afghanistan for another year. Germany, as the top NATO country contributor, has around 850 troops in Afghanistan, followed by Italy with 760 and about 500 for Turkey. A formal decision is expected to come at NATO's next meeting of its foreign ministers in Brussels in early December. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said that more should have been done to tackle the root causes of the worst refugee and migrant crisis since World War II. We have the details.
UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said that more should have been done to tackle the root causes of the worst refugee and migrant crisis since World War II. Ban stressed in the Slovak capital before visiting a nearby refugee center that the UN should have addressed this issue at the origin. He also praised the European Union for its serious engagement in finding a package of solutions to the crisis, including a controversial quota system to distribute refugees around the 28-member bloc. He hoped future EU moves will include a much broader and more comprehensive solution on how to address refugees coming from Syria and Northern Africa. The comments come as the EU is struggling to cope with an unprecedented influx of refugees and migrants amid an intense diplomatic debate over the way forward to end the 40-year war in Syria, which has driven 4 million people from their homes.
Authorities in the eastern city of Dresden stepped up security precautions on Monday for the first anniversary of Pegida, amid warnings from senior German officials that the anti-Islam group is stirring up hatred that could lead to violence. A surge of migrants to Germany over the summer fueled a revival of fortunes for the group, whose name stands for Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West. Germany's top security official said the domestic intelligence service was monitoring Pegida and called its leaders hard far-right extremists. Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière said that groups such as Pegida were paving the way for violence, citing a sharp increase in attacks on refugee shelters this year and a weekend knife attack on a leading candidate to be mayor of Cologne. The attacker told police he acted out of anti-foreigner motives. City authorities in Dresden said some 15,000 people were expected to take part in the Pegida rally on Monday. Several counter-protests with a total of 4,000 participants are also planned. Police imposed a curfew in Indian-administered Kashmir to quell protests against the murder of a truck worker who was attacked by extremists over rumors he had slaughtered cows. Schools and businesses shut and universities cancelled exams as hundreds of police and paramilitary forces patrolled deserted streets of the mainly Muslim region a day after 19-year-old Zahid Rasul Bat died of injuries sustained in the October 9th attack. Bat's death ignited protests, threw rocks and clashed with government forces who fired tear gas canisters to disperse them. The issue has become a flashpoint for religious tensions in Hindu-majority India. The murder comes at a time of heightened tensions over the consumption of beef in India. Developing nations accused rich ones at crunch climate talks Monday of aligning their interests, even as France's president and the White House stepped up efforts to seal a global deal. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon said the 195-nation negotiations in Bonn were frustrating and slow. In Paris, French President François Hollande affirmed there will be a deal coming out of the December 11th climate summit in the French capital, but cautioned against a hollow result. The White House hailed a pledge by dozens of major U.S. companies whose CEOs were to meet with President Barack Obama later Monday to back the climate accord and step up their own emissions reduction efforts. In Bonn, however, talks took a detour when a bloc of more than 130 developing nations, including China and India, rejected a slimmed-down draft agreement prepared for their 5-day parley, the last before the Paris summit. These were all the political news we have for now. Now it's time for all the business and financial updates, and the headlines lead the way. Egypt's stock indices surge as investors are feeling optimistic amid parliamentary elections. Oil prices retreat on China's slowdown. And new Saudi performance center adds to top prince's powers. Welcome back. In its closing session on Monday, Egypt's market indices collectively went up, affected by a high rate of purchasing operations after the devaluation of the Egyptian pound against the dollar this week. The market's capital gained about £4.6 billion, closing at £457.6 billion after dealings worth around £1.2 billion. The main EGX 30 index went up by 1.11%. The small and medium-sized EGX 70 index jumped by 1.71%, while the more expanded EGX 100 index went up by 1.2%. In global markets, U.S. stocks finished modestly higher Monday as gains in tech shares offset weakness in petroleum-linked equities following weak Chinese economic data. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed 0.08%. The broad-based S&P 500 edged up 0.03%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index gained 0.38%. In Europe, Germany's DAX rose 0.6%, while France's CAC 40 rose 0.03%. Britain's FTSE 100 inched down 0.4%. In Asia, China's Shanghai Composite Index lost an early gain to end down 0.1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng ended little unchanged. Japan's Nikkei 225 fell 0.9%. Oil prices slid Monday on data revealing that China's economy posted its slowest growth for more than 6 years, reinforcing concerns about weak demand from the world's top energy consumer. U.S. benchmark West Texas Intermediate for delivery in November dropped $1.07 to $46.19 a barrel compared with Friday's close. Brent North Sea crude for December delivery shed $1.36 to stand at $49.1 a barrel in late London deals. China beating market forecasts, but still the worst since the global financial crisis in 2009. Saudi Arabia has set up a new body that aims to improve the efficiency of government agencies while giving more influence to the powerful young Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Hit by falling oil prices, Saudi Arabia has set up a new body that aims to improve the efficiency of government agencies while giving more influence to the powerful young Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The National Center for Measuring the Performance of Government Agencies, which replaces an earlier oversight department, appears to be part of a wider drive by the new King Salman to cut wastage in government. The world's top oil exporter faces a budget deficit that economists estimate could total $120 billion or more this year. This has led the finance ministry to close its national accounts a month early to control spending. The new body was announced on Monday in a cabinet statement that also said a new committee had been set up to oversee real estate policy. It added that plans to tax unused land were being sent to the Advisory Shura Council for a review, a sensitive subject in the country with housing shortage. After taking power in January, Salman abolished several governing councils that really met and replaced them with two super committees, one on the economy and the other one on security. These have become the engines of Riyadh policy making. The new performance center will be governed by a council headed by the Deputy Crown Prince and including Economy and Planning Minister Adil Fakih and former Capital Markets Authority Chairman Mohammed Al-Sheikh.
Iran's oil minister Bijan Zanganeh launched a blistering attack on Monday on industry middlemen, branding them parasites that want to suck the nation's blood for their own financial benefit. His comments, a day after the USA and Europe moved to lift economic sanctions on Iran following a July nuclear deal, coincided with ramped-up efforts to attract international oil majors back to Tehran. Sanctions relief could unlock Iran, which has the world's largest combined oil and gas reserves from decades of underinvestment and stifled production. But Zanganeh urged foreign investors to deal directly with the Iranian oil ministry rather than using third parties to find their way into the Islamic Republic's abundant energy market. He added that Iran will hold a conference in Tehran on November 21st and 22nd to unveil new contract terms designed to tempt foreign companies back. Russia's economy shrank 4.3% in the third quarter this year as a recession caused by low oil prices and Western sanctions over Ukraine continue to take its toll. According to official data sources, Russian Deputy Economy Minister Alexei Vedev said on Monday that preliminary estimates put the year-on-year drop in GDP for the third quarter at 4.3%, slowing to 3.8% in September from 4.6% in August. Officials in Russia are struggling to breathe life into the economy as the ruble has dropped in value and inflation and poverty have risen sharply. Overall, Vedev said the Russian economy dropped 3.8% for the first 9 months of the year. Russia's government estimates that the economy will shrink by some 3.9% in 2015 before recovering slightly by 0.7% in 2016. Standard & Poor's upgraded Ukraine's credit rating from selective default thanks to the former Soviet country's ability to strike a major debt write-down deal. The New York-based agency said it was raising Ukraine's foreign currency sovereign rating from SD to B-B, a grade defined as highly speculative, but one that leaves the door open to future borrowing from abroad. S&P downgraded Ukraine to selective default on September 25th. The war-riven country was then still going through the negotiations with its commercial creditors aimed at easing its outsized debt burden and keeping an IMF-led life support package on track. Foreign cash injections have boosted Ukraine's gold and hard currencies value to slightly more than $13 billion, nearly double the low they had reached at the end of last year. Yet the upgrade is not all good news for President Petro Poroshenko's austerity-driven government. Indian Coal Secretary Anil Swarup said India is rather talking to South Africa to buy coal mines there to feed its expanding steel industry, added that New Delhi also stop imports of coal used to generate power in 3 years as domestic output jumps. After years of poor production crippling power supply, state-run Coal India is boosting output at a record pace to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi's goal of connecting to the grid millions of Indians who still make do with kerosene lamps. But India, which wants to triple its steel capacity to 300 million tons by 2025, does not have enough reserves of coking or steel-making coal, prompting Coal India to look at assets abroad. Overall coal imports into India's third-largest buyer fell for the third straight month of September in a country used to seeing shiploads coming in as new power plants started. Still in India, the head of India's central bank on Monday called for the International Monetary Fund to stop applauding the monetary easing policies of many developed countries. We have the details.
The head of India's central bank on Monday called for the International Monetary Fund to stop applauding the monetary easing policies of many developed countries. Reserve Bank of India Governor Rajan in a speech that the IMF should be doing more to assess the knock-on effects of stimulus measures on the global economy. He said at a G20 consultation meeting in Mumbai that the IMF is supposed to be looking at these sorts of issues, but it is sitting on the sidelines and applauding such policies. A number of developed economies, most notably the United States, have engaged in significant monetary easing to boost their economies as global growth slows. But Rajan said some of the policies had been extreme and ultimately detrimental to emerging markets which struggled to cope with large inflows of capital which then disappeared when the easing stopped. Rajan, the former IMF chief economist, said in his address that the policies initially encourage growth but the effect quickly wears off, leading to a musical crisis.
China's economy decelerated in the latest quarter, but stronger spending by consumers who are emerging as an important pillar of growth helped to avert a deeper downturn. The world's second largest economy grew by 6.9% in the 3 months ended in September, the slowest since early 2009 in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. That was down from the previous quarter's 7%. Weakening trade and manufacturing have fueled concern about possible job losses and unrest. The communist government has cut rates 5 times since last November in an effort to shore up growth. The latest data highlight the two-speed nature of China's economy in the midst of a marathon effort by the Communist Party to nurture self-sustaining growth based on domestic consumption and reduce reliance on trade and investment. The business and financial news we have for now, and by this we come to the end of this edition of Panorama News. Please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.